Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today to discuss the challenges and benefits in application discovery and service mapping. I'm Paul Bigbee, a senior product manager with vArmour, and I've been working on network security policies, zero trust architectures, and application dependency mapping for over 20 years. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by two experts to help me discuss this topic. Ben Ennis from ServiceNow and Ben Damery from Contender Solutions. Guys, you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. So I'm Ben Damery. I am the ITOM delivery manager here at Contender Solutions.
Yep. Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Ennis. I'm a strategic architect with ServiceNow.
Great. Thank you, guys. All right. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about IT discovery and service mapping and its role in modern enterprise. We'll talk through the challenges around application understanding. We'll talk through the integration that ServiceNow, vArmour, and Contender have put together to enhance this process. We'll go through a case study in which we've seen the benefits of this, and then we'll take some Q&A from whomever have posted us questions. So with that, I just want to move into a little bit of a discussion around the context of this amongst the three of us. I'll just kick it off and note that when vArmour tries to build an accurate real-time map of enterprise application infrastructure, I think that the biggest problem that we frequently find is that although we get good observability, good visibility for how a lot of these different compute resources and the applications that reside on them are communicating, the challenge really is that the way that they're described, right, the business meaning to the customers who are trying to use that map isn't very clear. And so, that data is attested to and built, in the CMDB. And so, the challenge really has been how do you accurately reflect what you have in one system in another and keep that information flowing into each other. And so that would be kind of the first challenge I would point out. And I'd be curious to hear what you guys have seen in terms of this kind of service mapping.
Yeah, so I can talk about that a little bit. So we see a lot of our customers specifically looking at implementing service mapping technologies to be able to actually provide a better set of operational efficiencies for themselves within their organization. And this spans beyond visibility, right? It's also performance as well. So when customers are doing this activity, there's a lot of stuff that we can get from the discovery itself. So obviously we can scan networks and get devices and make relationships from what we see on the network, but it's that logical layer above that's non-discoverable things, like what business processes is a part of, what group is responsible for this business capability? Is this a customer-facing thing? Is it an internal-facing thing? All of that kind of stuff plays a role in how we manage those applications, how important it is that we actually map some of the services in there in the first place, because that's not a no-cost activity for us. From a labor perspective. So I think having product like vArmour does give that sort of lens. It almost puts the magnifying glass on these really important applications for an enterprise.
Yeah, I echo that 100%, right? Having different tool sets that could bring in different types of data to help enhance that service mapping that or the application services that you're creating and then developing the mapping for that underneath it really helps quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that when we typically talk to these kinds of personas, in the case of a lot of these larger customers, the consumers of this information, tend to get a little pigeonholed, tend to get a little siloed, right? You've got SecOps who have a particular, cybersecurity personas, but there are now emerging roles like enterprise architects and operational resilience planners, personas that, especially in more regulated environments, are really requiring a broader view, kind of, Ben, to your point about trying to get that business service level kind of mapping perspective. So I'd be, I think this is something that we're going to touch on as we move through the conversation. But yeah, I'd be curious to kind of how do these different kind of key personas for the purpose of service mapping, how do they consume this kind of intelligence?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's so many different areas, right? Like you were mentioning, enterprise architects, just enterprise infrastructure people in general, right? What's being affected? What's going down? How are my applications being affected? Security operations. When you start enhancing your data with security operations information, where do I need to upgrade .NET infrastructure, right? Things like that. Starting to identify the different areas where you need to be focused on remediating security-based issues. So there's so many different areas that it touches.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we introduced our Common Services Data Model, or our CSDM, I think one of the things that we found out was that we needed to create a couple of different constructs that were a little bit more open-ended. So we created a construct called an information object in our APM product. And that helps us be able to say, okay, I have a business application, I have a service, I have instances of this service, and I can create these information objects that are representative of that, as opposed to just discovering physical assets on the network, right? So now I can take those physical assets in the network, and then I can bubble them up and relate them to my business processes. So these are the pieces that the enterprise architect persona tends to work on quite a bit at our customers. Mm-hmm. And what they'll do is they will always be looking at doing a couple of different activities. One of those might be application rationalization. In the enterprise, we have a lot of applications that do the same stuff. So when vArmour is running in an environment, we can now see the connections between everything. So, hey, it turns out, these 5 services are hitting an API endpoint that looks like it's providing the same data. We're paying 5 different licenses. The only reason we're doing that is because it's 5 different groups in 5 different parts of the company. So an enterprise architect would look at that and go, you know what? Sorry, I went on mute there. I can rationalize those applications together into one contract with one vendor that provides for all of those 5 or 6 applications, right? So those exercises aren't very easy to identify unless I have real good discovery and a real good lens to see what my applications are actually communicating with and how they're doing it.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Ben. I think in experience with a couple of customers recently, that the continuous nature of feeding that data, both, Relationship Cloud, vArmour Relationship Cloud, picking that data up and then being able to push it into ServiceNow so that enterprise architect is continuously getting that kind of information, as opposed to having to, go and fetch it, basically on like an audit schedule. Yeah. I think that makes for a much more resilient and, to your point, can really dramatically reduce the cost because you're not sitting on something for a quarter or a year.
And I know it sounds kind of silly, but drawing those architecture diagrams, right? It's what I don't know, what I don't know, right? So, right. And ultimately, that's what's going in front of the customer leadership to make business decisions. So this only enhances that, right? Yeah, as far as we can tell.
And the other persona that we typically are talking to, the operational resilience, have kind of the same. They have different outcomes, but kind of start in the same place, which is they don't know what they don't know. And when they're trying to do planning around things like business impact analysis, or trying to trace a particular, especially with a lot of our customers who have pretty sizable homegrown application development arms, where they're deploying their own applications right to their businesses. That's a case where if there happens to be a particular threat or vulnerability, it's one thing to be able to find that, in the build part of the cycle. It's something else entirely to find it in production. And so being able to have that kind of traceability back into production and then, use ServiceNow to drive that intelligence and decision-making back, through production and into build is a life cycle that we see a lot of these operational resilience folks, looking to clean up. Great. So let's talk a little bit about what we've been trying to focus on here. The first is with this integration is a use case around targeted monitoring. So the idea around this is the particular application owner, for example, will be able to accurately understand the both the historical and the immediate nature of their application and what it depends on. And so, this is a picture that, to Ben's earlier, to your point earlier, you get a much more granular level of information. You know when sessions are built between very specific workloads, between very specific application functions, between very specific application services. And you can really see and understand not only what those communications are, but in some cases where they might in fact trigger some policy violations, which you can see here highlighted in red. And so, that the ability to give a very scoped view to different application owners allows you to frankly distribute the effort around application dependency mapping, continuity planning. Ben, to your point earlier, cost efficiencies. You can really scope that down and focus and distribute that work out. I think the other area that we're seeing more and more of is really by virtue of being able to generate dynamic information and push that back into the CMDB, we're removing some of the manual efforts that are associated with generating this data, especially among customers who have multiple conflicting sources of data. They have multiple systems of record. You find this all the time in large enterprises, and so this ability to make it continuous and to drive a lot of the static information out of the system and figure out which systems of record really can be frankly expired. And then we have a lot of joint customers with ServiceNow where vArmour is using all of this kind of assessment to drive ServiceNow to be the single system of record. And then of course, there's just flexibility around discovery itself. So using ServiceNow's discovery for agent-based kind of polling or areas where discovery is really strong, but using vArmour's Relationship Cloud to get that much more granular, continuous assessment and aggregation of dependencies and communication. Anything you guys want to add to that?
I think if we take an industry lens at this a little bit, if you look at where this activity is really the most valuable, and some of our customers that are more widely distributed, so you look at retail customers or financial services, or even manufacturing, there's the configuration compliance piece there is pretty important, right? So there's always somebody monitoring what configuration is going out to what device, especially if you're in the pharmaceutical business or manufacturing business. There's actually, in fact, audits in some cases with the FDA to ask you, hey, what configuration is on that equipment and when's the last time it changed? That would be lab practices for pharmaceuticals I'm referring to there. In those cases, how do I continuously monitor, right? So it's not always the case now where everything happens inside of my little lab, right? I send a lot of stuff up to the cloud now, right? Some of those systems contain sensitive data. Some of them contain data that doesn't matter. It's just sensor data, right? It would be really nice as an enterprise architect if I could see all these lab applications that I'm responsible for, if I could tell whether they're actually, the policies I have in place are actually being enforced. If not, then I need to do something. Today, we don't really have a great way to be able to monitor that and ensure like the compliance is actually being met during active production versus when I deployed or through a change management request.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And again, it kind of to the point we were making earlier, the integration that we built with ServiceNow is really focused on closing that loop and increasing the automation so that, again, this kind of manual check-in process is eliminated, and instead we promote to the enterprise architect. Sometimes I think the industry is, still working on this, but, resilience drift, right? Or application resilience drift. There are these changes that naturally occur as part of a large digital business. That's in fact, the point we're really trying to make here around speed, control, and flexibility. Customers, expect us to build products that enhance the velocity of the business, not slow them down. And if you have to be checking in all the time, right, you're creating more workload. And instead, our focus, from vArmour's perspective with ServiceNow is, highlight the pieces that are actionable and remove all of that manual kind of work. So, specifically, the integration that we're focused on here is beginning with pulling selectively by the customer out of ServiceNow the configuration items that provide the semantic meaning to the application name or service, the application function, what we call realm or region, where that application is deployed, what kind of infrastructure it's deployed to. We want to pull that data out of ServiceNow so that the dependency map that we're building and sustaining and managing has the correctly synced information from all of the various workflows and people that drive it in ServiceNow. So that's what you see at the top, is us pulling those application labels over into our observation and then our map. And then based on our map and our risk engine, we can then selectively push dependency and risk data back into ServiceNow to really fuel the point we were just making about actioning information to the specific personas through the various workflows and modules that our customers are using on the ServiceNow side. So whether that's a SecOps workflow or whether that's an application portfolio management workflow, we want to provide the dependency and risk data that make those decisions not just actionable, but highly certain, right? We don't want customers sitting back on their heels and waiting and thinking to themselves, well, do I trust this information? You can trust this information because it's just come hot off the presses. It's literally, you can go into the relationship cloud dependency map, and we have a real-time view of that application service, not just a static mapping between resources. So that the dependency and risk data is the areas where we really, I'll throw it back to you, Ben. I think that there's a lot of different opportunities for us to equip that information in ServiceNow.
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to help fill in. Sorry, I'm talking on mute here. Got too excited. So what I was saying was, we were talking earlier about how we were going to draw those diagrams, right? It doesn't sound like a super interesting use case, but being able to figure out the connections between different components of your application is actually a lot more challenging than you think. And especially with cloud, sometimes you don't even know because it's not even inside your data center, right, that it's communicating with. So being able to fill in these gaps, if you will, and then being able to assign configuration compliance to some of them, whether that's data going in and out or whether that's network device configuration or equipment configuration that you're observing over the wire, then we can now start to say, as an enterprise architect or as an app owner, hey, here's the areas where I'm at risk. Here's the areas where I'm doing well, my compliance is in check. And then I can start to build mitigation plans around, sometimes that's around changing employee behavior or changing contractor behavior or something like that with your application. So these are things that are now going to be able to be discovered by us. And now that enterprise architect has a direct conduit into the live environment, they can respond to things a lot quicker.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben. Go ahead, Ben.
I'll just say, I think you both hit the nail on the head there. For ServiceNow, it's about getting the data, right? And after you have the data, there are so many different things you can do on the platform to mitigate what's coming in from vArmour, right? Like you mentioned, workflows. I mean, something as simple as notifications. It's just having that data and the knowledge, like you said, hot off the presses, and being able to act on it quickly. That is a huge benefit. Yeah,
and that's kind of a perfect segue, because we really wouldn't have been able to do this without our partner Contender, Ben. So I just want to highlight that the critical bridge in our ability to build this integration was provided by you guys, and so I think it's important to highlight that expertise is critical to bringing this kind of continuous, highly reliable, trustworthy information to customers who are interested in proving out this kind of enterprise architect visibility and operational resilience. So, Ben, if you wouldn't mind talking through a little bit of your guys' expertise in helping us bring this together.
Yeah, so you can read on the slide, who we are and what our mission is. But really what we do is exactly what you're seeing here. We specialize on the ServiceNow platform and bringing data into the ServiceNow platform that helps us act on operations within, in this case, like within the data center, right? Whether it's incident management, change management, pulling in infrastructure, creating the application services and your configuration items that are associated with those services. We help to put together all these different pieces on the ServiceNow platform so that we can act on it and really create solutions that help transform your enterprise. Like I mentioned, this Service Graph connector being one of them. That's really what we specialize in, and we were very excited to take this on. It was an exciting project.
Yeah, and as vArmour partners with all of our customers on their ServiceNow projects, we're excited to have Contender alongside us, to help guide both the evolution of the Service Graph connector itself, and then obviously play a critical advisory role in terms of getting that value into ServiceNow and into those personas that we've talked about.
Yep. And this is honestly just one area of the platform that we work in and advise on. There's so many different areas, but they all bleed together in many cases. But like I mentioned, this is a fun to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great part about the ServiceNow platform, is that it has all of this interlocking value and spreads that information consistently across those different stakeholders. I mean, that's from vArmour's perspective, that's the value that we want to be able to push additional intelligence into, because ServiceNow is that kind of one-stop shop for so many of our customers who are looking to keep track of their enterprise.
I'm smiling over here because you said something that made me think of when we're advising and when we're giving, we think you should do this or whatever, and you see the light bulb go off, and you're like, oh my gosh, we unlock this, and now we have this available to us, and then boom, you unlock that, and you see the light bulb go off again, and then it just becomes a process, and you continue to grow, and you start to see the value that's provided.
And that, it's almost like we practiced this or something, Ben. That's actually a perfect, really resonant example for a customer of ours who went through this over the last year or so. The challenges, again, as we mentioned, were a reliance on manual CMDB data. So this was a customer who knew they needed to automate this process better, but they had the bane of many operators, Excel spreadsheets, Google Sheets, stale databases, and then other challenges when they were trying to describe, Ben, again, talking about the service, and trying to decompose that service. The trouble was, trying to link the manual CMDB data with something that was, accurate enough to make decisions around. And then finally, the real purpose for this particular bank around driving all of this data was to be able to make policy decisions. And the policy decisions in this case were around sort of zero trust microsegmentation policies for their applications. But I think it highlights that the data itself is a good starting point, for all of us. We want to make sure that we reconcile this data and clean it up and make sure that it's consistent. But ultimately, our customers are looking to make decisions, and in many cases, these decisions really affect the availability and continuity of these applications, and the service that they provide, obviously, to the business and maybe even to the company's customers. And so, tackling that with this customer was, as we mentioned, continuously update the CMDB, right? Make sure that it's fed with the right information, but also take that loop of value where we were discovering unknowns, parts of their application environment. Ben, you mentioned this earlier, right? Especially as customers move to cloud or attach things in cloud, that distributed responsibility creates drift. And so, vArmour can find those unknowns, find that drift in real time and highlight those, and those go back into the system of record, into ServiceNow, to get appropriately described, and then those labels come back into vArmour so that there's confirmation that the workflow on the ServiceNow side has been completed correctly. And so that continuous updating, that life cycle, is something that they've benefited from. I mentioned the seamless labeling. And then, this distribution of responsibility, I think, is a really key part. And I think it's frankly something that vArmour enjoys about ServiceNow, is that, we get to be a partner in this, and we get to see the benefit of customers pushing these workflows out. Again, whether that's the enterprise architect or the operational resilience planner, or the security operator. And so, Ben, if you want to talk a little bit through those workflows, I think we can hammer this home.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the big trends right now is certainly security operations, right? So if we were to look at those 3 use cases that you just mentioned there, the top of the list for most CEOs and most CIOs is going to be security. So this adds an immense benefit there, right, for the security operators. So I think for this, giving the visibility. Sorry, muted again. Making that connection between all of the different connections for that application and then mirroring up the infrastructure underneath it, that now gives the security operator a full lens, right? Mm-hmm. So now at this point, we're now responding to active events in real time. We're reconciling it against the infrastructure that we know is correct. We know that the source of truth is correct. And now we can start to make decisions quickly. So I think for any security team, the speed is important, right? I need to be able to identify and act now. Not tomorrow, not 5 minutes from now, right? Right now. So that's one of the key pieces that ServiceNow itself, we don't have any, of these tools that can go in, probe the networks and discover and monitor. What we do is we discover assets through our ITOM products, and we assimilate a single data model underneath our CSDM, or Common Services Data Model, I should say. And then we use that throughout these workflows, like the security operator workflows, or the governance, risk, and compliance workflows, or even into like just general operations, like incident management. Yeah. So one data model is what ServiceNow generally preaches is one data model. So with that, we use that same set of information that you're feeding back into the CMDB, not just within security, not just within governance, risk, compliance, not just within ITSM, but all the workflows.
Yeah. I think the other thing about it that's really important, and I really want to drive home the point around that common data model, is that's what you really hear from every customer is we want to get to one system of record. We want to get to that one data model. And then I think it's incumbent, and I appreciate ServiceNow's Service Graph Connector marketplace for this, because it allows for the propagation of that data model to all of its participants, because ultimately customers have all of us in an ecosystem. And the fact that that Service Graph Connector marketplace exists allows us now to automate really the federation of that value and maintain consistency for our customers across the landscape of their investment, right? There isn't custom APIs and database synchronization and all that. We can just rely on the Service Graph. And it's been a huge benefit to vArmour.
Yeah. Definitely.
So we've got a few Q&A that I would just want to touch up on here as we close things out. And I think this is kind of a good transition because Ben, you just mentioned how ServiceNow has some discovery tooling. And so I think it's important for us to make sure that we provide clarity on, what is ServiceNow's discovery, focused on, and what is vArmour really focused on. From vArmour's perspective, I'll say that the Relationship Cloud really is looking at a massive pipeline of real-time telemetry to create the dependencies that generate what we think of as a service map. Whether that service map is relatively local to an application or service, or whether it's pan-enterprise, whether it's a service map that really is the service map of service maps, is all applications in the enterprise estate. Our focus is on, in Relationship Cloud, is having that very granular, very scalable view on all of the dependencies, the ways in which those applications have been and continuously communicate, and then overlaying a risk engine to that to allow customers the ability to build policy about what is permitted and what is not, and then feed some of those those pieces of policy back into ServiceNow to make sure that the policy is remaining consistent. And so that's our focus is on the dependencies, and not so much, frankly, just the collection of assets.
Right, and that's where ServiceNow that kind of fills the gap there with also other Service Graph connectors other than vArmour to fill in those discovered CIs, or we call them configuration items, but also our own discovery products. So ServiceNow has a discovery product ourselves that will go and probe networks, parts of the network to get devices and relationships, information, software if available, and populate the CMDB. The real power there, though, underneath everything, you mentioned Service Graph Connector. One of the core components to Service Graph connectors, or really any CMDB connector that's taking advantage of this, is our identification rule engine, or identification reconciliation engine, I should say. That is the power between everything. That's the glue of the one data model. We're able to take every class of device and put IRE attributes against them so that we can always normalize the data. And so that's what vArmour is helping us with, is to supplement those CIs that have been discovered by all those various products. Our customers have all kinds of different discovery sources in their environment. So the fact that we can glue all this together through that IRE engine, and with that Service Graph connector you mentioned enabling that's going to be a huge advantage for our customers.
Yeah, I was really pleased to see the IRE when we first started the integration, because that was always a question amongst our customers when they were going through this kind of CMDB reconciliation problems, is where are things coming from, and what do I trust, and which is more accurate than each other. And as soon as I saw IRE, I was like, ServiceNow answered that.
Yeah. Yes, that had been, for many years with our customers at the CMDB, finding a good way to, put governance around the data that's going in and making sure you don't insert stuff in there that is duplicate, that's
Right.
been the challenge. Each source back in the day was its own, there's its own transform and its own way of identifying the stuff, and you'd end up with 2 or 3 of the same asset. Depending on which, monitoring tool brought the event in, it would match it against something different, right? So
right.
that is a huge problem for our customers, right? Because now I can't trust my data anymore in ServiceNow. So that was why we developed that many years ago to accommodate that for our customers. And so far, so good. We've had a lot of great implementations, and customers are still trying to play catch up, but slowly but surely.
Slowly but surely, yeah. So speaking of which, as that data sort of is adjudicated through IRE in ServiceNow, there's a question we have about how frequently is this data synchronized between our two systems, between Relationship Cloud and ServiceNow's CSDM, and really is it real time? And again, I think it's important to note that these things depend on the amount of data that you want to move, but this is completely configurable in the integration itself. So you can configure this to kick off every hour, every 8 hours, every day. And so we, the Service Graph connector will build those files. We'll pick them up as they're available. We will realize them inside of Relationship Cloud. And as Relationship Cloud, goes through its aggregation of all of these dependencies, we can also provide those files, and the Service Graph connector will pick those files up depending on the kind of interval that customers might need, to populate the data model. So I think we've been talking a lot about personas, and I think let's talk shortly about who is this integration really intended for. We've been talking a lot about different personas. I'll use my coin and say the persona that we speak to very often is that operational resilience persona, the person who really is relying on what they read in ServiceNow and what they need to see in vArmour's Relationship Cloud. They need to read one thing and see that dependency map actually be consistent with one another, so that they can actually understand things like compliance and risk around things like business impact analysis, RTOs, RPOs, those sorts of things. So one persona that I know that we talk to a lot about this integration is that operational resilience persona. But we've also been talking about that enterprise architect. So Ben.
Yeah, we did. We've mentioned that a few times as a theme throughout this webinar. So It's actually the enterprise architect. I think of it as a level above that operational resilience person, right? So they're actually kind of the 10,000-foot view on these applications, right? So the operational resilience person may just simply be focused on trying to keep the lights on, right? So
Yeah, totally.
yeah, so that's, performance is important. Of course, any security related things as well, right? But ultimately, what they're trying to do is optimize the process. The enterprise architect is trying to do that, but they're also doing that through a different lens of saying, well, I have all of these enterprise policies that I need to. Sorry, my mute is going again. That I need to accommodate. So now I have to make a plan and a roadmap against my application, right? So not only do I need to know information about what's happening in the live environment, but I also need to know information about what's connected to it. So if I replace a part of my app, say with a cloud system versus what I have on-prem, then I might break some stuff, right? Especially if some of those systems that communicate with my technology can't access the internet for whatever reason, so all of these kind of nuances that come into architecting an application, optimizing it for security, for performance, for everything else, for additional capabilities as our business evolves, all of that comes into play. So I think that, like we said before, we have multiple personas here. So we got like a security operator, an enterprise architect, just a general operations person, or that resilience individual who's maybe focused more on the performance and optimization side. But I think, ultimately with the data we bring in here, what actually happens is you can enable these use cases for other personas and without necessarily even having to do any additional configuration.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Yep. We expect that there are going to be more personas. I met with one very large joint customer just last week, and they had more people piling on because the word had gotten out that there was going to be this data available. And so, that got more eyes and more utility out of ServiceNow, and it obviously, helps us talk about.
Yeah, that resonates with us for sure. Yeah,
totally. So, the last question I think I've got here is, how do we access this integration? And so I will say that the integration itself, the Service Graph connector, is in beta in April of this year, and so the process of deploying that beta, we expect to be in production by June. I think will be process of reaching out to your appropriate ServiceNow teams and ServiceNow partner, and pulling that beta Service Graph connector into preferably, I think, the dev instance, so that we can make sure that as we talk to customers about this, right, they start to learn how to configure the Service Graph connector itself, and then obviously start moving information between the two systems. Any other comments from you guys? Anything else you want to add to the discussion?
No, this was a pleasure. A lot of fun having a conversation.
Yeah, this has been great. Yeah, seeing the value that this integration unlocks is awesome. This has been great. Great.
So, in wrapping things up, a lot of gratitude to Contender and to ServiceNow for joining us in this partnership. If you'd like to get in touch with us to learn more about this integration, just reach out using the Contact Us link in the attachment section of this recording. And on behalf of Ben at Contender and Ben at ServiceNow, thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Cheers.